The Tejas fighter is a fourth generation fighter. It's currently in service and many hundreds are going to join service over the next few years. But the aircraft you see behind me is an aircraft that is not in service because it is still being developed. It's India's future fighter and it's called the AMCA. The big challenge now is whether this aircraft that the Indian Air Force definitely needs going forward is on track. What makes it different? And what is the status of the AMCA? Watch this report. In the first episode of this new season of Battle Cry, we told you about how India's homegrown Tejas jet is having a very good run. With nearly 40 aircraft in service, 83 upgraded versions on order, and an order for another 97 in the pipeline. The bigger and more powerful Tejas Mark II is also making progress towards a potential order for 200 or more jets in the coming decade. But the Indian Air Force is betting its future combat on a totally different fighter. It's called the AMCA, short for Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, the working title for India's under-development fifth-generation fighter. Like the Tejas, the AMCA is also homegrown, but it couldn't be a more different aircraft in every possible way. As a fifth-generation fighter, the AMCA will be a stealth aircraft that's difficult to detect by radar and other sensors by virtue of its shape and materials it is made of. It will sport advanced sensors and avionics of its own, carry smart internally held weapons, and have the ability to break the speed of sound without being a gas guzzler, among many other features. The first flight of the AMCA will take place at the end of this decade, about 5 years behind schedule.
The AMCA, the phase 1 with the G414 engines, should start flying in about 10 years, or the first flight will happen in 7 years, but the induction may take 10 years.
Mindful of time and cost spikes despite the challenges, the government has decided to execute the AMCA program as India's first ever public-private partnership for an advanced defense program, with India's Hindustan Aeronautics Limited and state-run DRDO to rope in a private sector giant to execute the program. But over 3 years since that decision, things haven't moved forward. There is significant pressure to keep the AMCA program on track. China has developed and built over 200 J-20 fifth-generation fighters, and while their combat qualities remain the subject of debate, China is developing a second fifth-generation fighter, the FC-31. Fifth-generation fighter pioneers, the United States, already have large fleets of F-22 and F-35 jets in service. While Russia has begun using its own fifth-generation jet, the Sukhoi Su-57, in combat over Ukraine. India's 2019 airstrikes in Pakistan's Balakot confirm that offensive actions on enemy soil are a real and present mission for the Indian Air Force, and therefore having a stealth fighter like the AMCA can no longer be a debate. In a world in churn, the question now is, can India ensure the AMCA project stays on track, especially since India does have to develop it almost entirely on its own, given how classified and secret most of the associated technologies are? Will the AMCA deliver what future Indian pilots need for their future missions? And to talk about the AMCA, where things are at and what it's looking like going forward, who better than to hear from a former Chief of Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal RKS Bhadoria. Welcome, sir. You've been on Battle Cry before. Our previous episode with you on the Tejas program has gone viral. But unlike the Tejas, the AMCA is a future-facing project. It's still in that concept phase. My first question to you as a fighter pilot and a former Chief of Air Staff is to understand your appreciation of where things are really at with the AMCA.
Sure, Shiv. I'll try and cover things that should be known in the open domain or already in the open domain. As you're aware, this is the fifth generation platform being designed. Actually, the design started a fairly long time back. ADA had put a team in place, if I'm not mistaken, nearly 10 years back.
Yeah.
The design phase of this fifth generation aircraft is practically almost over or nearing completion. I think this is not very much understood. So it is not a de novo project that we are starting now. After all the lessons of LCA and the design that had become successful, this effort had started some time back, and the government had cleared a design phase, which is nearly over. So the on-paper design and system engineering, etc., has already been done. The approval of the project should be any time. I think it is almost in the final stages.
Yes.
And what this aircraft is primarily a fifth generation platform, a stealth aircraft, internal weapons, advanced sensors, of course, absolute sensor fusion. And with this time that has elapsed, I believe now elements of AI are being included fairly in a good form. The latest radars would come up, and the engine to start with will be G414.
Yes.
Later on, it would be upgraded with the fifth generation engine, so to say, when it gets developed, which GTRE is working on. So this is in broad nutshell about the project, and we can go on to details as you asked.
Chief, you've been looking at the AMCA program while you were the Chief of Air Staff, and even before that as a as a fighter pilot in the Indian Air Force, obviously looking forward to what comes after the Tejas. Could you give us your view on the core technologies and how competent and how how capable is India to prepare some of these fifth generation technologies, since these are technologies that nobody else is really going to give India, sir?
I think the primary challenge technologically is about the stealth. The stealth dictates a certain kind of platform with which inherently kind of poses aerodynamic limitations. So it is aerodynamically not the best of platforms, but from stealth perspectives which override the aerodynamics, that is where the challenge comes in. To get a good mix and ensure that it is a very low RCS aircraft. So technologically, I think that is one. In the electronic side, the challenge is to have everything silent and stealth. That is equally important. That means, conformal antennas. There could be nothing protruding. Your entire radar, EW, ESM, everything fused very well. When you don't have antennas, that itself is a issue.
Yes.
We have not had that kind of antennas on any of our aircraft so far. So I think electronically that is one challenge which we have to get successful. When you talk of integration on the aircraft and in the entire envelope, that is where it becomes difficult. Yes. Other than that, because from the time we started, some time has elapsed, I think the challenge is to really now bridge the technology gaps of where we are today. That would mean increased AI, very heavy networking and elements of AI being thrown in terms of data fusion, ability to handle really big
so the
data,
aircraft doesn't become obsolete.
Ability to really shorten the loop. A lot of AI in terms of giving the pilot a very clear and final picture. He doesn't have to do much of system switching. Manned-unmanned teaming is something that needs to come in within this fifth generation, although in most places it is part of, almost part of sixth generation. That element has to come in, and I'm talking of manned-unmanned with combat UAV, and practically having an unmanned version of AMCA itself. With,
like the
with something like electronic pilot, what is being talked about, which means synthetic visions, all kind of auto takeoff, auto landing, your combat systems. So the challenges in terms of bringing in the latest is, I think, what we should address now, looking at where we are today and looking at our adversaries.
So we've touched upon the technologies, sir. Now I want to talk a little bit about the execution because there could be some concerns there. 4 years ago, I had broken a story right here in India Today about how the AMCA program was going to be progressed as a public-private partnership between HAL, DRDO and a large private sector company. My sense is that hasn't moved forward for various reasons. That decision was taken at a time when you were the Chief of Air Staff as well. Do you know why that hasn't moved forward, sir?
I think that is very important. It was a sensible thing to do then when it was thought about. It is a sensible thing to do today. And I think this is one challenge that ADA, DRDO and the industry needs to really address. There are many ways of looking at it. You can discuss with the industry or the private industry. If the discussions are not open and honest, you can throw out the private industry in no time. But that is not the issue. You must involve private sector. I think the SPV model is a must in its production, and it must get involved right from the word go. I've also heard that initial discussions on this has not gone off well, and I think that is one issue that ADA and HAL need to address. If HAL is going to be part of SPV, which they should,
Yes,
but more important is for the industry to be involved from the word go. Unless it is a SPV model, we will not be able to bring in the kind of efficiencies and the kind of reliability, cost cutting, what we've been targeting. We would be repeating what we've been doing for the last 3-4 decades.
Yeah.
So I think that is an important point you raised, and it is not difficult. We have to really choose the right industry partner. It should be an open and open discussion, absolutely transparent, and I see no reason why our industry cannot be involved.
Chief, my follow-up question to that would be, why haven't things gone well? 4 years is a very long time. It's a simple partnership between public and private. Why haven't they gone well, sir?
No, I think one of the reasons is that discussions so far have been kind of preliminary in nature and explorative kind of discussion. I think ADA had one big session with the industry. Which can be repeated. Important issue is how you approach this. It must be approached as that SPV is a must, and therefore we need to choose a partner.
Are you okay? Let's come to the timelines now, sir. You had the DRDO chief saying 7 years from now, end of this decade, we'll see a first flight. Is that what you understand to be the timeline? Are you okay with that?
Okay, the first part, timelines, I think at that time, 7 years was being talked about as 7.5 to IOC, which I thought was a little optimistic. But as we stand today, with AMCA, with the LCA Mark II already cleared, and those technologies will take off, many of the systems will go into Mark II. I had covered this point earlier too. And therefore, that shortens the testing time and the development time of AMCA. There are technologies much beyond LCA Mark II, which of course will get developed here. When I was talking to ADA boss recently, I think they are working on a timeline of about 4.5 years to first flight, and about 10 years to IOC.
Chief, just to clarify, you're saying 4.5 years to first flight of the AMCA, right?
Absolutely, 4.5 years to first flight of AMCA. You must realize that design phase is nearly frozen. I don't know the latest, but it was more or less there. And it's a question of now, going on to the next phase the moment the project gets cleared. First flight, initial taxi trials will start much earlier, but first flight to about 4.5 years is very much possible. And the team is really very optimistic about it. We must also realize with the recent developments, a lot of energy needs to go in from all directions, from services, from ministry, which is already happening, and from the industry and other. And if anything, the timelines need to shorten. So the more effort you put in, the faster money you put in, and more people behind it, I'm sure you can shorten this.
It's very good to hear 4.5 years is the timeline to the first flight, because the DRDO chief said 7 years. If it's 4.5 years, that's really, really good news. My final question, Chief, is a comparison between what the AMCA intends to be, or hopefully will turn out as compared to fifth generation fighters that are currently already in service, including the Chinese J-20. How do you see that comparison, sir? Will it be comparable or better than these aircraft?
I think we need to we need to learn our lessons from the previous projects, and a lot of lessons were organizational in nature, and the involvement of entire industry, be it private sector, be it DPSUs, be it your startups, be it youngsters working on good tech. Anybody, we should throw up on new challenges that looking at 10 years ahead, bring in new tech and new capabilities, and we will absorb it. Those are the kind of initiatives that need to be taken. We need to be really innovative in our approach.
Yeah.
And we need to change some of our technological thinking. Our basis has been the previous platforms and platforms, especially to do with communications, data, and assets. That means your ISR information, which will be on the net, your space-based and cyber, I can say again, your cyber security issues, your own, the moment you make electronic pilots kind of, unmanned combat capable aircraft, the cyber security issues of that itself.
Yes.
So these are the new areas that the industry needs to start working. So it has to be a absolute, national approach to this project. It should be our next big thing on the table, and everybody should work towards it. And I see no reason why we cannot build the best.
Most certainly hope a national approach is what happens now. There have been more than enough delays on an aircraft that the Indian Air Force had hoped to be actually seeing flying by now, an in-flight test. But we'll have to put all of that behind us and hope for the best going forward on the AMCA, because failure most certainly is not an option. Air Chief Marshal R.K.S. Bhadoria, as always an honor and a privilege. Thank you so much for joining us here, sir, on Battlecry. Now, so obviously, India's AMCA has a great deal of catching up to do and a tight deadline, because there are already a handful of fifth-generation fighters in active service, starting with the F-22 Raptor, the first fifth-gen fighter in active service with the United States, followed by the F-35 Lightning II, hundreds of these in service already with the United States Armed Forces. Then you've got China's Chengdu J-20. Over 200 of these are already in active service. Russia also has the Su-57. India had wanted to be a part of this program, but then pulled out and decided to develop its own. That aircraft has seen service over Ukraine. In fact, China has a second fifth-generation fighter in the pipeline called the Shenyang FC-31. That will come online in the next few years as well. Russia also has a second in the pipeline fifth-generation fighter called the Su-75 Checkmate. It's a single-engine fighter. And finally, even Turkey has the TAI TFX Khan, which is said to be a fifth-generation fighter. Looks very much like many other aircraft in service. And then, of course, you've got the AMCA trying to catch up with all of these. And also joining us on Battlecry this week is our favorite aviation writer and analyst, Angad Singh. Angad, I'd like to start by asking you about your understanding of where the AMCA program is right
now. So Shiv, design work on AMCA at various levels has been ongoing for some time now. Recent conversations and questions about it have indicated a sort of late 2020s, early 2030s time frame for the flight testing and service entry phase to begin. It's fairly well known now that there'll be a Mark 1 similar to the LCA program with imported engines, GE 414s, and then a definitive engine and a definitive AMCA will follow in later years. So sort of a phased variant development program.
With the design, by and large complete now, the difficult phase of actually developing a first artifact of this aircraft. What kind of challenges do you foresee, Angad? Because many of the, core technologies that need to be developed are technologies that perhaps India cannot, simply import from the outside. What are those technologies that you see being a big challenge?
To start with the engine, right? That's the biggest challenge. It's partially solved by picking a known in-service high-thrust engine in the GE 414, but the Air Force's own requirements and ADA's own plans call for a higher thrust definitive engine. So that's obviously one big challenge. And then the other will be the stealth, the low observable characteristics of the aircraft, because I think it's safe to say that at this point, the Indian scientific and industrial establishment has reasonably mastered the art of airframe aircraft integration, flight controls, fly-by-wire, that sort of stuff. The sort of fourth generation bouquet of technologies. So the challenge will be moving up to the fifth generation and beyond, because of course AMCA is not really burdened with particularly ambitious qualitative requirements. If you look at the global fifth generation landscape.
Yes.
But it is also running about 10 to 15 years behind that same landscape. So, it's good and bad. Being behind the curve is a double-edged sword, because, of course, you have more time to finesse the final product. You have more time to include things like next generation, so-called sixth generation technologies, like the Air Force has alluded to in recent press statements. Yes. Things like AI decision support and so on. No need to get into the specifics. Being behind the curve also gives other producers and developers of fifth generation technology to catch up to you and surpass you. So it is a challenge, and retaining manpower, retaining institutional knowledge over these extended 20, 30-year development timelines is a challenge.
About 4 years ago, Angad, there were reports about how HAL and the DRDO plan to move the AMCA project forward as a public-private partnership, bring in a large private sector company, one of the big ones currently in defense, and move it, as a special purpose vehicle, as a public-private partnership, like I said. But that doesn't appear to have moved forward. Do you think that's going to be an imperative moving forward on the AMCA, that it is going to need private sector participation?
Without knowing the specifics of that plan and why it didn't come to pass, it's hard to say, Shiv. But let me put it this way: from an industrial point of view, I don't see it as critical. Yeah, it's definitely nice to have. And from a technology point of view, again, the same. I would like to see a world in which DRDO and HAL farm out a lot more development work, just so that we can build those core competencies and build in those redundancies in our ecosystem. But from it's less important on the R&D side. On the industrial side, it is definitely more important, because building that excess capacity is always going to be helpful in terms of fulfilling the Air Force's requirements at scale and on time. And also, it's not really been India's not really been a major defense platform exporter. Yeah. But if we were to do so, then scale and size are going to be a huge role in that, and bringing in private sector participants, especially people with the kind of industrial muscle, yes, if you will, to do the job well, is going to be important.
One final question, Angad. You've seen the Tejas program. You're looking at the way things are going now as well. If you had to offer some kind of a prescription of sorts as an expert about how maybe, with hindsight, with the lessons learned from the previous programs, some of the things that should be done in a fresh way going forward on the AMCA, what would those be?
Well, at a high level, in one line, program management. Yeah. But there are more granular concerns that I personally have. For example, I'd mentioned that it's not a terribly ambitious bleeding edge specification, but at the same time, I hope they don't repeat that LCA Mark 1 mistake of leaving no room for growth, because especially in modern air power, things change very rapidly on the electronics front, on the weapons front, and I hope, particularly for AMCA, because of the internal weapons carriage and the stealth requirements, I hope things like growth and change have been catered for from the outset. Because it would frankly be unacceptable to have to hear excuses, 10 years from now that, so-and-so missile was changed, or the radar spec was changed, or something like that.
I certainly hope we don't have to hear those things, but it's good to hear that at least things are moving along. We look forward to hearing more from you on this. Thank you very much for your time, Angad, here on Battle Cry. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Shiv.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Battle Cry. We hope to see you again next week. And remember, as we always say, when it comes to India's national security, this country's strength will only be truly realized when no human is sent into battle and no weapon needs to be fired. Thanks for watching.